Hey, hi. So in this video, we will value PVR INOX. We'll go full throttle. We'll project out the three financial statements and then do a DCF. Valuation of this business is particularly very interesting for three reasons. One is because this business has very high fixed costs. So a small change in fixed costs, small increase in fixed costs will have a disproportionate adverse impact on the valuation of this business. Okay, so although we covered, so this is essentially operating deleverage playing out. So although we covered operating leverage and deleverage in the earlier video, but you would see the impact playing out in this video. So that's very interesting. Okay. Second reason why this is the valuation, why this video would be interesting is because, see, this business has very high goodwill. Okay. So PVR and INOX, they underwent a merger. Okay. So the price that PVR paid above the fair value of INOX, okay, so that amount is, that overpayment is called goodwill, and it appears on the books of PVR. Okay. So you would see कि क्या impact होता है, what's the impact of goodwill on the valuation of PVR INOX and how it impacts certain ratios. Okay. So that's two. Third reason why the valuation of this business is interesting is because this business has very high lease liabilities or operating leases. Okay. So you would see how we learn how to treat lease liabilities in when we are valuing a business. So हम वो सीखेंगे. All right. So let's begin. And yeah, one thing before we begin. So if you are interested in learning financial modeling, valuation, equity research, then feel free to reach out to me. I'll be glad to help. All right. And I'm thinking of starting a batch, if you will. So I've been training and mentoring students who have been reaching out to me randomly, one-to-one. But if in case I have people reaching out to me, multiple people reaching out to me at once, I may kind of club them together. So, and perhaps, mentor them all at once. So it would be perhaps a better use of my time and productive use of my time and theirs as well. All right. Okay. So now let's begin. All right. All right. So PVR INOX, it is trading at a market cap of just a shade under 17,000 CR, which I believe makes it a small cap, if I'm not wrong, as per SEBI's classification. Okay. And go further, the stock has been pretty volatile over the past year. Okay. And if I go further, if you look at the profit and loss statement, okay, they underwent a merger towards the end of 2023 financial year. Okay. So right now, in 2024, okay, this revenue is both PVR and INOX combined 6,000 CR. Okay. Okay. Before, if we go back to pre-pandemic levels, pre-pandemic era, okay, you would see this is just PVR. So the revenue is not strictly comparable. Okay. But before pandemic, they were doing 3,000, 3,400 CR per revenue. But now, of course, combined revenue is 6,000 CR. Okay. All right. But if you look at, if you pre-pandemic, if you especially look at 2019, okay, the margin that they reported was 19%. Now they're reporting a margin of 30%. Okay. And one of the key reasons why that is, is because of the accounting. The accounting that is, the accounting rules that have evolved. So back in 2019, okay, the rental payments, okay, were needed to be expensed. They were part of the P&L statement. That is, they were embedded within the expense bucket, okay, because they were expensed. Okay. Now, those rental payments are not expensed anymore. That is, they are not part of the expense bucket. Okay. So what happened was back in 2019, and again, this is something that we've covered, but I'm just repeating it. Back in 2019, accountants said, see, rental payments, you're obligated to make these rental payments not just for that year, but for future years as well. Okay. All right. So let's say, so you're obligated to make those rental payments. Okay. Okay. So let's say if you shut shop in let's say 2 years, but you're obligated to make those rental payments over a 7-year period. Okay. So even if you shut shop, close your business, but still for the remaining 5 years, you're still required to make those rental payments because that's an obligation. Your accountants ne kaha, let's not treat it as an expense. Let's treat it as a debt component in the balance sheet. Okay. So all the future lease payments, they appear as a debt component in the balance sheet. And this is something that we've discussed. Okay. So they were removed from the expense. तो भी expense का part नहीं है. Okay, they appear as debt. ठीक है, तो उससे हुआ क्या? At the EBITDA level, you look more profitable because of course you don't have rental payments embedded in the expense. Okay, all right, so you look more profitable than you appeared in the old form of accounting at the EBITDA level. ठीक है, लेकिन because you have debt, ठीक है, in new debt component in the balance sheet, so you have to make interest payments on it. Okay, all right, And then you have a counter asset in the balance sheet to counterbalance the debt. Okay, so you have an asset component, so that you have to amortize. Okay, so the interest component and amortization component, okay, which is roughly the rent payment that you need to make that year, okay, वो appear करता है, that is spread across interest and depreciation. So your interest and depreciation looks inflated than it used to, than it was in the old form of accounting. तो although आपका एक्सपेंस कम हो गया न्यू फॉर्म ऑफ अकाउंटिंग में, लेकिन न्यू फॉर्म ऑफ अकाउंटिंग में आपका इंटरेस्ट और डेप्रिसिएशन थोड़ा इस रीजन से इन्फ्लेट हो गया, क्योंकि एक तरीके से आपका रेंटल पेमेंट यहां पे घुस गया है. It is spread across these two, interest and depreciation. So what happened is profit before tax, your profit after tax, you report lower profit before tax or profit after tax in the new form of accounting. ठीक है, all right. That's one of the reasons why you are reporting a lower profit before tax. ठीक है, and the other reason is not just this, not just accounting. The other reason is of course because see, pre-pandemic now they had a significant share of revenue coming from advertising. Okay? Now advertising has still not picked up yet. Okay, and advertising is a high margin business. So as and when it starts flowing in, so the reported profitability should improve. Okay, and one thing more I wanted to call out. See, this is what they are reporting to the street. Okay, लेकिन if we remove the accounting adjustments, the accounting that I just spoke about, okay, then they will look profitable. Okay. So, and by the way, I will probably link a portion of the because I spoke about accounting and what has happened and how do you treat accounting, how do you interpret lease liability. So accounting portion of my video, I'll link it here so you get a more comprehensive understanding. Okay. How do you interpret financials when such a thing, when you have lease liabilities in your books. Okay. All right. Now moving forward, and of course we look at when we come to the valuation, which we're going to do immediately after this. Tab you will see how do we treat lease liabilities, in when we try to value a business. Okay. All right. Now move forward. यहाँ पे if you see the number of shareholders, they have increased like anything. If you see pre-pandemic, they had like 33,000, 50,000 shareholders. Now it's around more than 250,000. Okay. It's partly or major reason, in fact, is because of the equity. There's frenzy happening in the Indian markets. Okay. A lot of people have awoken to the idea of equity. And plus there is irrational exuberance, I feel, in the Indian equity market, at least in pockets. That is one reason which has contributed to a lot of shareholders jumping in the stock market. And so any which ways. All right. So now let's pull up the spreadsheet and do the valuation exercise. Okay. Okay. All right. So I have the P&L of this company in the spreadsheet. Okay. And this P&L is after removing the impact of new accounting. So this is adjusted. These are adjusted financials. Okay. So because if you see, I have the rent component as an expense line item, okay, which is not the case in the new form of accounting anymore. Okay. All right. Just so that to make things simple. Okay. All right. Okay. And if you see EBITDA, अभी हमने देखा था Trina.in में in 2024, the EBITDA as per the new form of accounting is around 30%. But if we make those accounting adjustments, if we go back to the old form of accounting, the EBITDA is only 13%. Okay. All right. And these numbers I have actually sourced from their investor presentation. Investor presentation में they gave adjusted numbers. All right. I thought I'll just show you this. Okay. All right. Now एक बार balance sheet देख लेते हैं. All right. All right. Now let's read through the. Let's quickly scan the balance sheet. See, everything is in millions. Okay? All right. See, whenever I read the financial statements or let's say the balance sheet here, so what I do is I also pull the notes as well. Notes to the financial statements. I pull them in the spreadsheet. Okay. Let's say if there's a goodwill line item, मैं देखूंगा कि there is a note 4A next to goodwill. I'll write the note 4A here. I'll go to note 4A in the balance sheet. I'll read through it, summarize my understanding, okay, and put my understanding here in the note description at a high level. Okay. I know this is hard work. Okay. It will take time, but you should do this. Okay. It will take time, but first time I know it's going to take time. Second time again, it may take some time, but third time and on, you will get in the knack of it. So after that, you would be faster. You'll be lightning fast. Okay. Right. And this way you make sure that you are reading through all the notes, which is very important that you do. Okay. So any which ways, All right. So if you look at the total assets, okay, total non-current assets, they have around 150, 160 million K assets, which is around 15,000 CR, 16,000 CR. Okay. If you see bulk of those assets, those non-current assets rather, those non-current assets are property, plant, equipment, right of use assets and goodwill. तो आप देखो, अगर आप मोटा मोटा अगर आप हिसाब करो, ठीक है, तो दिस इज व्हाट, दिस इज ऐसा कर लेना चाहिए ताकि आपकी अंडरस्टैंडिंग हो जाए. इफ यू सी, मैं इसको राउंड नंबर्स हटा देता हूं कि 20% तो आपका पीपी प्रॉपर्टी प्लांट एंड इक्विपमेंट हुआ, बट 70%, more than 70%, are your intangible assets in the form of goodwill and right of use assets. You see कि कितना कि गुड कि intangible assets, they make a significant portion of the non-current assets. Okay, that is one key observation. Okay, all right. Okay. And why it is so high goodwill? Because as you saw that they had a merger with Inox. Okay? That is why they are sitting with this high goodwill. Before 2023, they did not have this high goodwill. They have a very low amount of goodwill. लेकिन अभी they have a high amount of goodwill. ठीक है? And before 2019, they did not have this right of use asset component. तो ये भी नहीं था और ना के बराबर ये भी था. तो ये दो component अभी recent adds हैं, which is making a substantial portion of their assets. ठीक है? Which is like these intangibles. All right. So this is a key observation. All right, that you should be making. All right. Okay. So now if we like go forward and all the inventory, if we move forward, all the inventory is food and beverage का inventory. ठीक है? And अगर if we move forward, okay. So if you see, equity, equity कितना component है of their equity, and let's do that. Equity, I want to see what component is equity as a portion of their equity plus liability. Should always just do that to kind of get a sense of the size and scale of the balance sheet. ठीक है? So equity is around 44%. The equity is around 44% uh, of the balance sheet. Okay, all right. And if they continue reporting losses, then of course you'll be depleting equity. Okay, that's going to happen, and that happened also. Okay, अगर if you look at borrowings ना, borrowings जो actually जो उधारी ली है बैंक से, ये दो जो मैं येलो कर देता हूँ. If you look at these two items, so actual borrowings, they form 10% of the balance sheet. Okay, but the lease liabilities, जो lease liability है, lease liability 36 plus 3, 36 plus 3, मैं ऐसे ही दिखा रहा हूँ, कलर करने के लिए हटा दूंगा अभी कलर. Lease liabilities, they form 39% or 40% close to of their balance sheet. Okay, that is because of this new account, because now you're required to treat your rental obligations as debt. That's why ये एक kind of artificial debt मान लो, या एक kind of form of debt है जो पहले नहीं था, अब आ गया है. Okay, but actual उधारी is lower. Actual उधारी is only 10%. इसको अगर साथ में जोड़ लो तो ऑफ कोर्स इट्स वेरी हाई, 50% ऑफ द बैलेंस शीट. अगर दोनों लीज लायबिलिटीज एंड बोरिंग्स को साथ में मिला लो तो ऑफ कोर्स द ओवरऑल डेट looks very inflated, but that is actually not the case एक तरीके से. Okay, all right. Okay, so I thought I'll just mention that. Okay, and let me just get rid of these percentages and get me rid of the colors as well. All right. Okay, अब थोड़ा ratios देख लेते हैं very quickly. Okay, all right. So see, EBITDA we saw. Okay, these are adjusted EBITDA levels. 13% is the latest uh, EBITDA. EBIT is, let me do that. I don't know why. Let me estimate that here. EBIT would be because, yeah, EBIT divided by revenue. Yeah. So this is EBITDA. EBIT. Okay, this is 5%. Okay. Now, तो ये EBITDA हो गया, इनकी प्रॉफिटेबिलिटी हो गई. पैट एक बार कैलकुलेट कर लेते हैं. पैट क्या है? प्रॉफिट बिफोर टैक्स डिवाइड बाय रेवेन्यू. तो प्रॉफिट बिफोर टैक्स है आपका, ये एडजस्टेड प्रॉफिट आफ्टर टैक्स है. और रेवेन्यू क्या है आपका ना? राइट. सो एडजस्टेड बेसिस में Sorry, just 1 second. All right. So anyway, adjusted basis में they reported a profit of a shade under 2%. Okay. But last year it was negative. Okay. All right. And if you look at the gross fixed asset turnover, okay, so let's just, तो यहाँ पे क्या करते हो आप? You just so we will discuss these asset turnovers थोड़ी देर में, right? And the important thing which I wanted to call upon was look at this ROIC metric. Okay? ROIC is EBIT by invested capital. ठीक है? EBIT by invested capital. ठीक है? So it's very low. They're not meeting. Ideally, a business, okay, the ROIC in a business should beat the cost of capital or the cost of funding of that business. जो भी cost of funding या cost of capital है, they're not beating it right now for two reasons. One is इनकी profitability अभी low है, तो numerator low है अभी, ठीक है? क्योंकि EBIT margin itself is only 5.4%, and the other reason is denominator is also inflated right now. Why it is inflated? Because in invested capital, okay, you have the goodwill component as well, okay, which got added recently following the acquisition, following the merger with INOX. Okay, so that is the reason why ROIC, okay, looks pretty small number right now for two reasons. Both numerator छोटा है, denominator बड़ा हो गया है. Okay, so it has a double whammy effect playing out. ठीक है, so that's why. All right, but ideally over the long term you would expect कि ROIC should beat the cost of capital. All right, this is one thing I wanted to call out. Okay. All right, so now let's begin with the financial projections. See, to value any business, okay, you need first thing you need is you need to project out growth, and also, as per your judgment, what should be the longevity of that growth? कितने time तक growth will last करेगी? Okay? Then you need the margin at which that growth will come. What are the capital requirements or the capital efficiency? What are the capital requirements of that growth? That's three. Or the capital efficiency at which the business will operate. वो ये तीसरी चीज हो गई related to capital. Okay? And then also, what is the discount rate? Okay? Like what is the cost of capital or cost of funds? All right. So all these things are important. All these parameters you need to project out in the future. Okay. All right. So first, let's start with growth. All right. So let's move to the P&L. See, everything here is in millions. Okay. In fact, all the financial statements I have, they are in millions. Okay. So see, now to project the growth. Okay. See, in revenue, you have sales of movie tickets. You have sales of food and beverages. You have advertisement income, convenience fee. So let's say if you book through Book My Show, so you pay a convenience fee. So that goes to them. You have some other operating income, and then you have other income. So let's say so every year they generate some cash. They park that cash in the bank and they make a small interest income on that cash. Okay. So that is embedded within other income. Okay. All right. See, इसमें talking about sales of movie tickets, we've already projected PVR का box office revenue. ठीक है, तो हम सीधा उसे pull कर लेंगे यहाँ पे. Okay, but okay, one thing, we'll have to make a smaller adjustment because not all of it would actually go to the PVR, because a small portion of the PVR का box office collection would go to the mall owners or the developers. ठीक है, it's 16%. वो 16% small portion would go to them. ठीक है, और बाकी सब I think we can just pull. Okay, advertisement income, again, this is so how we can project that is, okay, and I've already done this projection ahead of time, so I'm just going to pull it. So this income is a percentage, is a proportion of the overall revenue. All right, so I'd assume ki it increases. Advertising income as a portion of revenue increases slightly over time. Okay, that is an assumption I'm going to make. All right, and convenience fee, I'm going to assume that it stays in the same proportion of revenue as it is today. Okay, all right. Other income, I'm just going to assume the same. It stays in the same proportion as it is today. Okay, and this item, other income, we can't project it right now, although it's a small item, but we can't project it right now because, as I said, for that we'll have to link all the three financial statements, the balance sheet, link all the three financial statements. Only then we'll get to know how much cash they produce every year for the future years, and that cash will be parked in the bank, and then they'll get some interest. तो वो अभी हम नहीं कर सकते until and unless we project out all the three statements. तो अभी मैं इसको later mark कर दे रहा हूँ, बाकी चीजें मैं pull कर ले रहा हूँ. All right, okay. So let me do that. Okay. And by the way, all my projections bottom up projections are parked here in this sheet, bottom up estimates. ठीक है, ऑलराइट, तो मैं यहां से पुल कर ले रहा हूं. All right. See, I'm done with the revenue projections. Okay? Or except this other income item. Okay? If you were not able to follow what I said, then I'll recommend that you revisit the that portion of the video, my earlier video, in which I make those projections and I show to you कि मैंने कैसे projections किए हैं. All right. So please revisit that portion. And of course, I'm happy to share this sheet with you. You can go through it and so you'll understand better if in case there's an understanding gap. And of course, you can write to me if you have any questions. Okay? All right. Okay. Now let's get to the cost part. Okay. See, there are two kinds of cost. One is variable and one is fixed. So let's first project out the variable cost. ठीक है, तो वेरिएबल कॉस्ट में आपके मूवी एग्जीबिशन कॉस्ट, कंजम्पशन ऑफ फूड एंड बेवरेज हैं, ये दो मेजर आइटम्स हैं. तो इनको हम प्रोजेक्ट करते हैं पहले. सी, मूवी एग्जीबिशन कॉस्ट मतलब द कॉस्ट दैट यू पे टू द मूवी प्रोड्यूसर्स इज 43-44%. तो हम अज्यूम कर लेते हैं द सेम एज लास्ट ईयर. तो जो भी सेल होता है उसका 43-44% ये लोग दे देते हैं मूवी प्रोड्यूसर्स को. ऑलराइट, एंड एनीथिंग इन ब्लू इन दिस शीट इज एन assumption. मतलब बेसिकली वो हार्ड कोड या कोई assumption है तो वो ब्लू में है. राइट, ओके. नाउ consumption of food and beverages. You see, this is a relatively higher gross margin business. Gross margin on this business is 75% almost. ठीक है, ऑलराइट. तो लेट्स अज्यूम कि सेम मार्जिन में ऑपरेट करेगा. तो नाउ हमें क्या करना है, 25.5% ऑफ सेल ले लिया फूड एंड बेवरेज का, तो हमने रेवेन्यू प्रोजेक्ट कर लिया. तो दिस इज डन एज वेल. ओके, ऑलराइट. Okay, now so we are done with the two main projecting out the main two fixed variable cost items. Now we have few things. We have a few fixed cost items as well. The first one being employee benefit expense. इसको for now एक थोड़ा अलग कलर कर लेते हैं क्योंकि I need to talk about them थोड़ा सा डिटेल में. And then you have rent, जिसके बारे में I know we've spoken so much. You have utilities, which is again fixed. You have common area maintenance, which is again fixed. You have some other expenses which are fixed as well. See, जो fixed expenses है ना, as we said, regardless of what footfall you have, what occupancy you operate at, whether the movie theater is closed or it's function or it's operating, ये expense तो आप incur करोगे ही करोगे. There is no escaping that, right? Okay. See, so these fixed expenses now, for that reason, you can't be projecting them at the as a portion of revenue. You assume कि right now, let's say they are a certain portion of the revenue. Okay, let's say they are this is 10% or whatever. This is they are certain portion of the revenue, and even in the future they're going to stay at the same portion of revenue. वो simplistic assumption we cannot take. Okay, all right, because see, as the business scales, as you'll have more people coming in the theaters, okay, all right, fixed expenses at per screen more or less would stay the same. You would continue incurring the same rent, the same electricity, पानी बिजली का खर्चा. Okay, but you have more people coming in, so you'll get more revenue. So basically, since you'll have more revenue with the same fixed expense, so I'm talking about operating leverage basically. So that revenue would basically lead to margin expansion. Okay, तो आप ज्यादा profitable हो जाओगे. So that is operating leverage playing out. ठीक है, so for that reason you cannot project these fixed cost items as a portion of मतलब you cannot assume कि right now they are at X portion of revenue, so in future also they'll be at X percentage of revenue. Okay, all right, because then of course you would not have any operating leverage playing out. Okay, so anyways, so how to project these fixed cost items is, okay, you first estimate what is the fixed cost at per screen level. Per screen level पे क्या fixed cost है. ठीक है, all right, that fixed cost at the per screen level should more or less be the same or just perhaps increase at the inflation rate. Okay, at the per screen level. Okay, so अभी वैसे estimate करना है, तो let me show it to you. Let me do that. So let me go to the cost assumption wala sheet. Okay, so in the cost assumption wala sheet, I have these fixed cost items listed out. Okay, so यहाँ पे हर एक item को मैंने per screen level पे already estimate किया हुआ है. So if you see rent, what I've done is I've divided the rent by the number of screens that they have in FY24. Okay, तो जो भी rent है, it's around 12,000 million का rent divided by number of screens 1700. तो करीब 12,000 rent है, मोटा मोटा 12,000 million rent है, और मोटी मोटी स्क्रीन 750 है, तो 6.8 मिलियन पर स्क्रीन आपका. मिलियन मतलब अराउंड 68 लाख पर स्क्रीन ये रेंट दे रहे हैं. ओके, ऑलराइट, 68 लाख रुपीस. ऑलराइट, तो हम अज्यूम कर लेते हैं and the rent escalation, okay, rent escalation is around 3.54%. Okay, that is there in the con call. I think I showed the snippet of the earning calls जहां पे वो बोल रहे हैं, and also in the investor presentation they mention कि there's an escalation of 3.54%. ठीक है, तो हम assume कर लेते हैं कि इतने पे वो ग्रो करेगा पर स्क्रीन लेवल पे. लॉक कर देते हैं, ऑलराइट. और इसको इनफैक्ट ऐसा करते हैं, ये तो सेम होगा, 4 को लॉक करने की जरूरत नहीं है बिकॉज आई जस्ट ड्रैग इट. सिमिलरली कॉमन एरिया मेंटेनेंस इज 1.9 या 19 लाख. तो उसको भी हम सेम कर सकते हैं. हमने अज्यूम कर लिया कि वो भी 3.5% पे इट्स गोना ग्रो. ऑलराइट. मैन पावर, मैन पावर में ग्रो स्लाइटली एट अ हायर रेट कंसिडरिंग इन्फ्लेशन. तो मैंने 5% मैंने अज्यूम किया है, ग्रो एट 5%. If you agree, disagree, please feel free to change this. ठीक है, इट इज बेस्ड अपॉन माय अंडरस्टैंडिंग, माय जजमेंट. यूटिलिटीज, यूटिलिटीज टिपिकली इतना इंक्रीज नहीं होते हैं, तो 4% मैंने आई अज्यूम 4% इंक्रीज. ऑलराइट. Over other overheads is 4.2 million per screen, which is like 42 lakh. Okay, तो वो मैंने अज्यूम किया है कि वो एट अ लोअर रेट ग्रो करेगा. राइट. तो मैंने यहाँ पे for the next 5 years I have projected these per screen costs, per screen fixed costs. ठीक है, now I have to make use of them in my P&L projections. ठीक है, तो employee benefit expense मेरे को क्या करना है. So let me go to the cost assumption sheet. You're talking about manpower, right? So I pulled 3.9 and then I go to bottom up estimates. यहाँ पे I have the total number of screens in FY25. Okay, all right. One thing you would see, always keep an year, let's say 2025 in this case, at the same column across all the sheets. ठीक है, trust me, is going to make your life easier. So year 2025 में you keep year 2025 in the same column across all the sheets. तो आप देखो सब कुछ J में है, ये J में है हम यहाँ पे, and we are pulling these two items from cell J7 and J20 in their respective sheets. ठीक है, so this way you'll never go wrong. All right, okay, so we have, हमने ये प्रोजेक्ट कर लिया. Okay, all right, okay. So you see, this is the employee expenses going down a little. ठीक है, although we have baked in an increase at inflation rate पे, but overall level पे as business is scaling, you have more people coming in. हमने higher occupancy estimate करी है 5 years out, slightly higher, if you recall. Okay, that's why you have operating leverage playing out here. Okay, you have operating leverage playing out. ठीक है, all right. Now let's do the same for rent. All the fixed expenses, I'm just going to do the same. I'm going to drag them from the cost assumption sheet and multiply it by the number of screens. So I would be able to project all these fixed items that I haven't marked in light red shade. Okay, let me do that. All right, so I'm done projecting out all the fixed cost items. Okay, so if you see for all these items, okay, let's say you take rent. Okay, you take rent. Rent as a portion of revenue is going down slightly from 19% to 16%. Okay, all right, because although we have baked in the rent escalation of 3.54% per screen every year, लेकिन despite factoring in the rent escalation, still there is as a portion of revenue, it's declining. ठीक है, because operating leverage is at play here. Okay, that is very important, guys. For any fixed cost business, आपको यूनिट लेवल पे प्रोजेक्शंस करने हैं. इन दिस केस स्क्रीन है तो पर स्क्रीन है. अगर कोई रिटेल स्टोर है, मान लो एवेन्यू सुपरमार्ट्स है, तो यू हैव टू basically first estimate the fixed cost per store level पे and then make projections for fixed cost at the store level, then multiply it by the number of stores. ठीक है, all right, because that's how you would have the if there is operating leverage in that business, that's how only operating leverage can play out. ठीक है, all right, okay. I see there is a movie distribution which is a variable, not a fixed cost expense. तो उसको we can just assume कि it stays the same as last year. So उसको you don't have to do it this way because it's a variable expense. Okay, so every incremental revenue that you do, you would incur that additional expense मोटा मोटा. ठीक है, तो उसको you can assume as a portion of revenue. तो हम assume कर रहे हैं कि 3% ही रहेगा. And because that's an assumption, so मैंने blue में कर दिया. All right, 3% times all right. So okay, तो मैं इसको बस I'm just dragging stuff. All right, so total operating expenses that I have is the sum of all my projected all my expenses, so I'm just totaling them now. Okay, all right. So what's the percentage of my total expenses as a portion of revenue? Okay, you see from 87 they're going down to around 80%. All right, again I cannot repeat the word operating leverage. And of course, अगर आप बोलो कि COVID फिर आ गया या quality of movie goes down, then of course you would have lesser number of people coming in and instead of operating leverage, you'll have operating deleverage at play. Okay, so the reverse may happen. Of course, that's the risk that we may run into. Okay. All right, moving forward, now we can estimate the EBITDA. EBITDA to ho gaya hai. EBITDA kya hai? Is revenue minus all these other expenses. Okay, so I'm just going to drag this. Okay, and EBITDA percentage kitna ho gaya? This revenue divided by this expense divided by total revenue. So it's 13.9, 14%. So you see EBITDA, adjusted EBITDA rather, I should say adjusted EBITDA. Okay, this is also increasing from 13% to 20%. Okay. All right. See, we cannot complete the P&L because we still have we still need to project depreciation, and we need to project finance costs as well. Okay. And depreciation you can only project once you estimate the capex, once you estimate the capex requirements and overall gross assets that this business will have. क्योंकि depreciation you occur and amortization you occur on your gross fixed assets and your intangibles. तो अभी हमें वो project करने हैं balance sheet में, only then you will be able to project out this expense. And similarly, finance costs we can only estimate only once we are able to project out the debt requirements for this business over the next 5 years. तभी हम ये finance cost estimate कर सकते हैं. All right. All right. So this means now we have to project out the balance sheet items like the capital requirements, right? So let's go to the capex and working capital schedule. All right, so I'm in the capex and working capital schedule of my spreadsheet. Okay, so यहाँ पे भी I have the capex schedule and here I have the working capital schedule. ठीक है, तभी समझेंगे. All right, see, capex schedule में of course the first item that you need to project out is the capex. What would be the capital requirements, in this business to fund the new screens, to fund the expansion in the future years. Okay, so for that you need to know कि in the past financial year or in the past years how much they have spent per screen. Okay, in capital expenses. All right. Okay. So if you see the annual report or if you look at the con call, in fact, let me just go to the con call real quick. All right. See, so if you look at the look at this, what they're saying. The total capex outlay this year was about 630 CR. Okay. All right. And this was used to open the new screens. I think they opened around, let me go to the spreadsheet. I think they opened around 130 screens or so. So this 630 divided by 130 gross new screens that they opened would give us the total capex per screen. Okay. Capex per screen कैसे करोगे? Okay. So we just saw 630. Okay. So everything is in millions. So 6,300. Okay. Divided by, let's go to the bottom up sheet जहाँ पे I have the number of screens. यहाँ पे, yes, 130. 130 is the gross addition in the number of screens in FY24. ठीक है, तो वो हम ले रहे हैं. तो आपका इतना 48.4 million या around 50 million, that is like 5 CR almost, is what they spend per screen in opening a new screen. ठीक है, we got that. Sure. All right. See, now let's talk about capex requirements for new screens. Okay, let's talk about that. Okay. See, in the one of the previous videos, I think I discussed this year in 2025 they plan to open net 50 new screens. Overall they'll open 120. Okay, all right, and 70 they'll close. So net new 50. लेकिन पैसा जो खर्च करेंगे वो तो नेट ग्रॉस 120 पे खर्च करेंगे ना खोलने में. 70 बंद करेंगे, ऑफ कोर्स बंद करेंगे, लेकिन पैसा जो खर्च करेंगे वो 120 स्क्रीन्स खोलने में. ऑलराइट, ओके. सो व्हाट वी गोट टू डू इज वी गोट टेक दिस नंबर, let's log this number because this is the per screen capex, okay, and multiply it with the gross addition of 120. Okay, this is what they've communicated. Okay, and now let's drag this number. So this is the capex requirement, क्योंकि we assume कि मोटा मोटा they'll open the same number because they haven't really communicated for the future years. So we are assuming कि they'll open the same 120 screens every year for the next 5 years. Okay, and they'll be closing a portion of the of old screens as well. So net they'll only add 50 screens, but they'll open 120 gross new screens. Okay, all right. Okay. Now see this capex now, this already had maintenance component embedded within it. Okay, all right. So I don't have to explicitly assume a maintenance capex. Okay, अगर कंजर्वेटिव रहना है तो you can assume. So I have taken an assumption here कि 5% of past year का depreciation is my maintenance capex of this year. If you want, you can make that assumption just to be conservative. Okay, all right. So we'll go ahead with that assumption, maintenance capex का. But this is me being conservative. Okay, right? All right. Okay. See now gross PPE. यहाँ पे क्या है? एक चीज important. Balance sheet में ना, balance sheet में. Okay, let me go to the balance sheet. I'm getting recorded, right? Yes. All right. Balance sheet में they report net PPE. ये जो PPE है, property, plant and equipment. This is net PPE, not gross PPE. Okay? Gross PPE जो होता है उसमें you remove the accumulated depreciation and then you arrive at the net property, plant and equipment. Okay? In the notes to the financial statement, okay, all right, यहाँ पे note number 3 you would find the gross PPE as well. तो वहां से मैंने gross PPE उठा लिया है. Okay? वहां से मैंने gross PPE उठा लिया और जो कि इतना है for the last 2 years. Okay? This is important because you should always pull gross PPE as well. Okay? And you would see why we need it. All right. So let's start projecting out the gross PPE. Okay? तो gross PPE क्या होगा? Okay? Last year का gross PPE, on that you add the capex that you're going to do this year, plus any maintenance capex that you have assumed, plus the capital work in progress from last year. Because the capital work in progress from last year, okay, so that construction work, whatever, ideally should, be completed this year, and it should the assets जो उससे बन के आते हैं, that should be added to the gross PPE this year. Okay, right? Okay, and let's drag it forward. Okay, all right. अब क्या करना है? All right. Now, see, to estimate depreciation, okay, all right, we need to project out to estimate accumulated depreciation, we need to project out depreciation every year. ठीक है? तो अभी depreciation अभी इस साल क्या है? Was 9.9%. तो कैसे किया है मैंने? यहाँ दिखा देता हूँ. Depreciation, and I was saying why gross PP estimating gross PP is why pulling out gross PP is important, because depreciation is calculated on gross numbers, gross fixed assets. तो आपने depreciation लिया and divided by gross PPE, so it's 9.9%. So you can assume in the future also it would be the same amount. Okay? Since it's an assumption, so it's in blue. Okay? Now let's estimate gross PPE for future years. 9.9%. Sorry, depreciation for future years. So 9.9% of gross PPE is your depreciation of this year. You drag this forward. आपका हो गया एक depreciation का estimation done. ठीक है? Now since you are done, now let's estimate accumulated depreciation as well. ठीक है? Accumulated depreciation क्या होगा आपका? Past year accumulated depreciation plus this year का depreciation added. Then you project it out. Future track कर दो. Okay? PPE क्या होगा? PPE, net PPE, gross PPE minus accumulated depreciation. So this is your net PPE. Okay? मैंने bold display किया हुआ है क्योंकि this would flow in the balance sheet. तो मेरी खुद की अंडरस्टैंडिंग के लिए there are so many items just so that I don't lose sight of it. तो मैंने इसको bold कर दिया है. This is what would have to go in the P&L. Sorry, on the balance sheet. ठीक है? All right. So we are done with this. All right. Now let's project the other items as well. See, ये तो PPE का part हो गया. In the balance sheet, if you recall, there is a right of use asset component as well. Why? Because lease liability है on the liability side that we have spoken about a lot. Okay? To counter them, and so right of use asset is a counter asset in the asset side. ठीक है? All right. So again, यहाँ पे see, you don't have to forecast gross ROU. Okay? You can if you want to. Okay? To keep things simple, okay, I'm just going to assume in the future, okay, I would have the same mota ROU assets. same right of use assets, net ROU assets. This is a simplistic assumption I'm taking, and the reason why I'm taking this assumption, I tell you. Okay, all right. See, okay, I'm not forecasting it because in my valuation, this is important. In my valuation, I am not treating lease liability as debt. Okay, I'm not treating lease liability as debt because जो rent expenses हैं, rent expenses, I've assumed rental payments as an expense line item. I'll repeat. If you saw my P&L, I've assumed these rental payments as a P&L line item as per the old form of accounting. Okay? In the new form of accounting, ये item होता ही नहीं है या बहुत थोड़ा सा होता ही नहीं. All right? Since I've assumed that this is a line item in my P&L, this is an expense item. Okay? So what it means is I'm not treating lease liability as debt. Okay? All right? अगर lease liability को debt की तरह treat करोगे, then you don't have to have a rental line item like this. Okay? लेकिन मैं assume कर रहा हूं कि I'm assuming I'm not forecast since I have a rent line item. Okay? तो मैं I'm not treating, basically I'm not the risk of repeating myself, I'm not treating lease liability as debt. Keep things simple. Kind of like what used to happen in the old form of accounting. And this is how investors really look at debt. When investors look at debt ना, when investors debt को देखते हैं, वो they in their mind they remove the lease liability. They just look at what is the udhari that this company has done from the bank. Okay, all right. तो मैं investing point of view से ये valuation कर रहा हूँ. All right, okay, all right. So, and if you have any questions, please write to me because I know if it may not be very obvious, it may not be absolutely crystal clear. अगर तो I'll of course I can spend more time. Perhaps I can make another video or I can spend time with you. Just write to me. Okay, all right, okay. All right. यहाँ पे अब okay, so this ROU stuff is done. Okay? Now gross intangible. Okay? They have इतना intangible. Okay? All right. तो see, उसमें they, of course, the gross intangible is amortized. Okay? It's amortized. All right. So right now they pay around 225 CR. Okay? So intangible as a portion, मैं हटा देता हूँ. Intangible. So amortization as a portion of the gross intangible is around 8.7%. हम assume कर सकते हैं future के लिए भी it would stay the same. Do कर देते हैं because this is an assumption. Okay. So my amortization, sorry, first we have to project out the gross intangible for the next 5 years. Again, for the sake of simplicity, ये बहुत difficult है project करना, तो मैं assume करूंगा it's the same across all the 5 years. मैं assume कर रहा हूँ कि it's the same across all the 5 years. Okay. So my amortization would be every year would be 8.7% of this gross intangible. मैंने इसको drag and drop कर दिया. Right? Accumulated amortization कितना होगा? Last year का amortization प्लस दिस ईयर का अमोर्टाइजेशन ट्रैक कर दिया, हो गया ये भी. व्हाट इज माय नेट इंटेंजिबल वुड बी, ऑफ कोर्स दिस डजंट इंक्लूड गुडविल. ओके, सो दिस एवरीथिंग इज एक्स गुडविल. सो दिस ग्रॉस इंटेंजिबल माइनस एक्यूमुलेटेड अमोर्टाइजेशन, ये मेरा ये आ गया. okay? जो भी चीजें मेरे को पुल करनी है बैलेंस शीट में, आई एम जस्ट हाइलाइटिंग देम. ऑलराइट, नाउ गुडविल की बात करते हैं. ऑलराइट, Goodwill is see, last 2 years it has stayed the same. And as we discussed earlier, okay, Goodwill would see every year they test Goodwill for impairment. They will test the value. They'll try to estimate the fair value of the acquired assets. Okay, all right. And if they think, see, they paid around what 6,300 CR something, right? 67,000 million rupees. Okay, for that merger with INOX. So every year they'll test whether the value of the acquired sets, the merged assets, is it below the purchase price? If it is below, इसका मतलब the premium that they paid needs to be diminished. Okay, लेकिन if they estimate कि कि the premium that they paid, if कि अगर ऐसा नहीं होना है, if the fair value of the assets acquired is greater than equal to the purchase price, then there'll be no impairment. तो हम भी assume करेंगे no impairment for the sake of simplicity. तो इसका मतलब क्या है कि आप same goodwill assume कर लो for the next 5 years. All right, इसको same रखो. So we have the asset side के non-current asset side के balance sheet items projected out. तो हमें pull करने हैं balance sheet में. Let's go to the balance sheet and pull them. Balance sheet में आ गए, ठीक है. यहाँ पे पीपीई हम एस्टिमेट कर चुके हैं, सो लेट्स जस्ट पुल इट। डन हो गया। कैपिटल वर्क इन प्रोग्रेस इंक्लूडेड है ऑलरेडी, इसमें आपको नहीं करना है एक्सप्लिसिटली पुल। राइट ऑफ यूज असेट्स हमने सेम अज्यूम किए हैं, सो लेट्स जस्ट पुल इट फ्रॉम हियर। ये हो गया। राइट, गुडविल अगेन हमने सेम अज्यूम किया, बट लेट्स पुल इट फ्रॉम हियर। Intangible assets we have projected out, so let's just pull them. Okay. All right, now there are some other financial assets, or the notes from to this, as per the notes to financial statements, this other financial assets is a security deposit that they're required to make, uh, and this is for business reasons. तो हम अज्यूम कर लेते हैं कि इट वुड स्टे द सेम, सिंपल assumption ले लेते हैं। you want you can assume, you can project it as a portion of revenue as well, लेकिन मुझे सिंपल रखना है, सेम अज्यूम कर ले रहा हूं। And second, see, this is where note capturing helps, right? It tells you कि other financial assets में है क्या। All right, I should have written better description, लेकिन I know reading it कि अच्छा this is security deposit, and then deferred tax assets, income tax assets, again they are impact on advance income assets or what have you। तो मैं फिलहाल again इनको भी मैं सेम अज्यूम कर रहा हूँ, इन आइटम्स को भी। नॉन करंट असेट्स, कैपिटल एडवांसेस, प्रीपेड एक्सपेंसेस, तो मैं इन सबको सेम अज्यूम कर रहा हूं अभी। दिस इज जस्ट नोट टू माई सेल्फ कि मैंने सेम अज्यूम किया है। अगेन द रिस्क ऑफ रिपीटिंग माई सेल्फ, यू वांट, यू कैन प्रोजेक्ट देम एज अ पोर्शन ऑफ रेवेन्यू, ओके, फॉर द नेक्स्ट 5 years, यू कैन डू दैट इफ यू वांट। मैं अभी सिंपल रख रहा हूं। सो टोटल नेट करंट असेट्स टोटल आ गया, ठीक है, ये हो गया। अब लेट्स प्रोजेक्ट द करंट असेट्स। टू प्रोजेक्ट द करंट असेट्स वी हैव टू गो टू द वर्किंग कैपिटल शेड्यूल। तो वर्किंग कैपिटल शेड्यूल जाते हैं, ठीक है। वर्किंग कैपिटल शेड्यूल में आए, ये शेड्यूल है वर्किंग कैपिटल का, ठीक है। वर्किंग कैपिटल शेड्यूल में इनफैक्ट ये जो पोर्शन है, दिस इज करंट असेट्स, तो इसको हम एक लाइन बना देते हैं, सो इट्स क्लियर। एंड देन नीचे का पोर्शन इट्स करंट लाइबिलिटी। सो फर्स्ट लेट्स प्रोजेक्ट द करंट असेट्स, ठीक है। तो दिस इज डेज ऑफ सेल्स आउटस्टैंडिंग, डेज ऑफ इन्वेंट्री आउटस्टैंडिंग, ऑलराइट, ओके। तो लेट्स यहां पे इसे प्रोजेक्ट अज्यूम कर लेते हैं कि इट्स द सेम। डेज ऑफ इन्वेंट्री आउटस्टैंडिंग हमने एस्टिमेट कैसे किया है, यू जस्ट डिवाइड द इन्वेंट्री बाय, हमने सेल्स का पोर्शन अज्यूम कर, डिवाइड द इन्वेंट्री बाय सेल्स टाइम्स 365, ओके। तो फोर्स दिस इज अगेन दिस इज अ स्मॉल नंबर बिकॉज यहां पे इन्वेंट्री इज ओनली फूड एंड बेवरेज का इन्वेंट्री, ओके। तो नाउ यू कैन प्रोजेक्ट आउट इन्वेंट्री, सो ये ऑलराइट, सो दिस इज बेसिक 30 डिवाइडेड बाय 365 टाइम्स P&L प्रॉफिट, और इसमें लेट्स लॉक, ओके, तो ये आ गया, राइट। सिमिलरली लेट्स प्रोजेक्ट ऑल दीज अदर आइटम्स एज वेल। यहां पे ना ये टोटल, इनफैक्ट लेट मी बी वेरी क्लियर, मैंने लोन्स को, ये 3 आइटम है ना, तीनों आइटम को आई काइंड ऑफ क्लब देम अंडर वन। तो मैं जिस जिस लॉजिक से मैंने इससे प्रोजेक्ट किया है इन्वेंट्री को, उसी सेम लॉजिक से आई एम गोइंग टू प्रोजेक्ट आउट ट्रेड रिसीवेबल्स एंड ऑल दीज अदर असेट्स, करंट असेट्स, ओके, ऑलराइट। All right, so I'm done with projecting the current assets. Okay. Similarly, let's project the current liabilities as well while we are in this sheet. So this sheet se will be done. Okay. So trade payables. Okay. So you would see trade payables is around 38 days they take to pay their suppliers. Okay. Right. So हम assume करेंगे in the future also they take around the same number of days pay of their suppliers. And same logic से, and again this we have assumed as a portion of revenue to be consistent. तो हमने क्या किया, 38 days कैसे estimate किए हैं, you've divided the trade payables, okay, by sales and then multiplied by 365. If ideal way is that you divide this by the cost of goods sold, yeah, you can do that, but I thought let me be consistent. So मैं sales as a portion of sales कर रहा हूँ, okay. So any which ways, so how you're going to project out trade payables is you take this 38.3, this is number of days, okay, divide by 365 times the sale या revenue, ठीक है। Again let's log 15, हो गया ये, let's just drag it, तो सिमिलर लॉजिक से आई एम गोइंग टू अज्यूम द रेस्ट ऑफ द current liability items as well. So let me do that. All right, so I'm done projecting them. All right. Now, working capital, in fact, I should say non-interest bearing working capital. Yeah, basically non-cash working capital. I should say non-cash working capital. Working capital is current assets minus current liabilities. It is the money that's blocked. Okay? तो मैं यहाँ पे क्या कर रहा हूँ? Current assets minus current liabilities ही कर रहा हूँ. तो क्योंकि मेरे current assets and liabilities have been projected, so I can project out the working capital for the future as well. Okay. So we are done with this projections. Now we just got to pull all of these two over to the balance sheet. Okay, let's do that. Balance sheet में गए, पहला inventory. Let's project out the inventory. So we are done. In fact, let me pull over all the current assets and the current liability items here. Okay. All right, so I'm done projecting the current assets. Okay. All right, तो मैं total assets भी project कर लेता हूँ. So sum of all the non-current and the current assets. So you would see यहाँ पे हमने ये project, we have not projected investments, cash equivalents, bank balances. मोटा मोटा they are just cash equivalents. So हमने वो project नहीं किया है. Okay? See, you can only project these once you're done linking all the three financial statements. So only then you would come to know how much cash you're producing every year. So this would be the final step. You can't do it right now. Okay? So this would be the final step. So let's just put it in a different color. We'll have to revisit that. ठीक है, then we'll remove the color later. ठीक है, all right, okay. Now let's go to the equity and liability side of the balance sheet. ठीक, before we get started with the equity, since we've already projected out the current liabilities, so हम in fact पहले equity कर लेते हैं. Let's do the equity. Let's go in order. ठीक है, all right. तो equity जो है कितना होगा? See, every year the profits that you make get added to equity, or the loss that you make would of course deplete your equity. ये होता है ना. तो आपका जो इक्विटी है वो आपने लिया पुराने साल का, प्लस किया, एंड यू गो टू द P&L, गो डाउन, और जो प्रॉफिट आफ्टर टैक्स है आपने उससे लिंक कर दिया, प्लस कर दिया. आई नो अभी हमने प्रोजेक्ट नहीं किया प्रॉफिट आफ्टर टैक्स, हमें करना है, लेकिन फिलहाल ये लिंक कर दो. लिंक हो गया. ओके, so we are done with this, and I realized one thing. Let me go to the P&L, small detour. ये depreciation we have already estimated ना, तो let's link it. वो तो हम कर चुके हैं. Let's link it. Okay, let's do that. Depreciation क्या है? Depreciation is, let's go to the cash and working capital, working capital schedule. Depreciation क्या है? ये depreciation plus amortization, यही तो है, right? हो गया ये भी. So this is done as well, right? अब हम earnings before interest and tax भी कर सकते हैं. All we got to do is we got to take EBITDA. From EBITDA we got to remove depreciation. So we have the EBIT as well. EBIT है ये basically. Okay, so we have the EBIT as well. Okay? EBIT percentage भी हम calculate कर सकते हैं. अब पहले भी कर सकते थे, मैंने शायद की नहीं होगी. EBIT. Okay, we have done it in the ratio वाला sheet, लेकिन मैं यहाँ पे भी explicitly कर दे रहा हूँ. 5.4% EBIT margin है. So you see operating leverage at play, and it's increasing to 12% based upon the assumptions that we have taken. ठीक है, all right. Now finance cost अभी बचा हुआ है estimate करना. वो हम तभी कर सकते हैं once we are done with the liability side, or more specifically the borrowing or the loan in the liability section of the balance sheet. और हम वहीं पे हैं अभी. So let's go to the balance sheet. All right, so now we are in the liability वाला section. So let's start with the non-current liabilities first. तो इसमें see borrowings ना, borrowings हैं, okay? तो अभी हम इसको estimate करना होगा. तो हम let's write it. This is important. Okay? तो हम इसको अभी estimate करेंगे. All right. तो मैं assume कर ले रहा हूँ in this borrowings. What I'm doing is last year I'm taking the last year borrowing plus I'm adding lease liabilities. Because lease liability essentially is a debt. I know in this valuation I'm not treating lease liability as debt, लेकिन मैं optically बस यहाँ पे दिखा रहा हूँ कि this is like a debt. Otherwise it's not actually functioning like debt, if you will, in this valuation. But this is just to show optically that this is being treated as debt. लेकिन otherwise this is not functioning as debt, if you will. ठीक है, right? So in here borrowings में I added lease liability plus I'm also adding the current short-term borrowings, plus I'm also adding short-term lease liabilities. I'm adding everything here. And still we'll have to make some adjustment here. So we'll have to revisit this. Okay. So lease liability, we don't have to explicitly project out because it's included here. Other financial liabilities, these are security deposits again. So let's just assume it was same here as last year. Okay. Provisions are your gratuity, employee gratuity, compensated absence. So again, usko same assume kar lo. These are small numbers, so I don't want to like break my head at all in trying to same kar lo and just get done with it. Something is very small, you don't have to break your head over it. Right? It's not worth it. All right. Now let's drag it. तो ये हमारा non-current liabilities हो गया. I know we have to revisit this. येलो में डाल देते हैं. We have to revisit this. जैसे हमने कैश में डाला है येलो because we'll have to estimate it later. इसलिए इसको भी हमें revisit करना पड़ेगा borrowings को. Okay? All right. अब यहाँ पे current liabilities में आ जाते हैं. Non-interest bearing current liabilities we have already estimated. ये दोनों जो borrowings and lease liabilities हैं, that we have clubbed them under here. तो हमें इनको explicitly estimate नहीं करना है. Forget about them. Okay? Trade payables, other non-interest bearing current liabilities we have already estimated in the capex and working capital schedule. So I'm just going to pull them from there. Okay, so let's do that. Trade payables. मुझे और मैं बाकी के लिए भी कर देता हूँ. All right, so I'm done with my current liabilities as well. So total liabilities अब मैं इसे sum कर देता हूँ. Non-current liabilities plus current liabilities. So I'm done with this. Let me move this. ये हो गया. And total equities and liability भी हो गया अब तो. So total equity is this plus total liability is this. This is done as well. Yeah. And of course, the balance sheet is not going to balance right now because there are a couple of pending things that we need to do. Okay. तो check कर लेते हैं. Total assets minus equities and liabilities. Historical financial statements के लिए the balance sheet is balanced. For the new, for the next 5 years, it's of course it's not going to be balanced as I said. Okay, because a couple of adjustments we need to still do. All right, so let's do them. Okay, all right. उसके पहले now since we have some form of debt projection, I know we need to revisit it, but we have some form of debt projection. Okay, so now we can calculate an interest rate on this. So let's do that. तो हमारा P&L complete हो जाएगा. Let's go to the P&L. Okay, in the P&L. Okay, see we have this finance cost. See this is adjusted finance cost as per old accounting. ठीक है, so this is estimate कर लेते हैं कि what is the finance cost. So this is actually which is paid to the bank. बैंक से उधारी लेके जो पे किया है वो finance cost है. All right, and not the interest expense on the lease liability. Any which ways. तो यहाँ पे in the denominator we'll not only take the bank borrowings, we'll take lease liabilities. Ideally नहीं लेना चाहिए, but doesn't really make a difference. 2.2%. Of course, interest cost of course is higher than 2.2%, but that's fine. ये actual interest इन्होंने pay किया है. In the denominator, we have assumed a higher denominator. So optically this looks low, but this is correct. They are actually paying 9.5 or 10% interest. If you go to the balance sheet, मैंने यहाँ पे लिखा हुआ है, based upon I pulled it from the notes, they are paying around 9 to 11% interest, 9 to 11.6% interest. वो यही दे रहे हैं on this borrowing, on this borrowing, ये वाला. ठीक है, all right. लेकिन in my denominator I've clubbed these liabilities and short-term borrowings and short-term lease liabilities as well. So that's why overall मेरा value denominator, because denominator is inflated, my interest cost looks 2.2. Optically it looks low, but it's not actually low. ठीक है, all right. So any which ways, I'm assuming same finance cost in the future years. So 2.2% of my, I'll just make sure I'm getting recorded. All right. This is done. And of course, this is going to change, but अभी के लिए ठीक है when we revisit the borrowings. Okay? So now let's assume total expense ये तो वही है. Profit before tax क्या हो गया? Profit before tax क्या हो गया? Okay? Your total revenue minus total expense, which includes finance and depreciation as well, along with all the other expenses. Yeah. So this is done as well. Okay? Now profit after tax estimate हो जाएगा. Okay. पहले tax देख लेते हैं. Last year 383 दिया था इन्होंने million. So tax is calculated on the profit before tax percentage. Let's assume this is around the corporate tax rate. So this would be the same for the future. Okay? So tax would be 25% of PBT. This is the tax. The tax हो गया. So profit after tax would be PBT minus tax. ये हो गया आपका, and you're done with the PAT estimation for the future years. All right. And now, if you go to the balance sheet, okay, you would see your equity. The adjustment would have happened because we had linked profit. Say we are adding profits every year to equity. हमने वो linkage पहले form कर दिया था पहले ही. All right. So now we are done with the P&L. We are almost done with the balance sheet. Okay, I'm saying almost because of course the balance sheet will not balance. We still need the cash. Okay, so for that we need to model the cash flow statement. ठीक है? So let's go to the cash flow statement. It has three components: cash flow from operations, investing, and financing. ठीक है? तो cash flow from operations में क्या करोगे? You pull the PAT, profit after tax. Profit after tax हम अगर pull करते हैं, drag it. You add the depreciation component. Depreciation क्या होगा? Depreciation तो हमने estimate किया हुआ था यहाँ पे. Where did it go? Yeah. It's a non-cash expense, so it would get added. Depreciation and amortization actually दोनों हैं. Okay, and then change in working capital that needs to be netted out. All right. यहाँ पे less change in working capital, तो मैं पहले ही minus sign एक append कर दे रहा हूँ. I'm prefixing a minus sign. Then so what I do is I go to capex and working capital schedule. I've already estimated the 2025 में what is my non-cash working capital. So I just pull this value. Okay. All right. It's negative basically. So that means this working capital would be added. Okay. Negative working capital matlab it would be a positive contributor to the free cash flow. I'm sorry, I need to take this off. I think I messed up something. This is, you have to take the change in working capital. Sorry. Okay. So which is we have not estimated that. So let's go to capex and working capital. Okay. यहाँ पे let's do change in working capital as well. Not the overall working capital, of course. This is what we need. Change in working capital. We have it now. So यहाँ से this is what we need to drag. Okay. Now let's So let's go to the cash flow statement. यहाँ पे again putting a negative sign क्योंकि you have to net out the change in working capital. तो यहाँ पे you pull this. All right. So this is how. So basically, since you have negative working capital, okay, so and you net out the change in working capital, so it's a positive contributor to your free cash flow, right? ये हो गया. All right. You just drag it, drop it forward. The total cash flow from operations कितना होगा? It would be some of this, and some of this. This is your cash flow from operations. Okay. All right. So this is done. Now let's come to the capex. Capex में, all right. See, all cash outflows are reported with a negative sign. ठीक है, तो हमने that's why we have prefixing a negative sign. And let's go to the capex and working capital schedule. यहाँ पे we've already estimated the capex requirements. Okay, so what we do is we add this. एक second. Sorry, I think let me go back. Yeah, we add this plus this. Okay, तो ये हमारा total maintenance capex है. Total capex including maintenance है. So this is our overall capex requirement for the next 5 years. Okay. So So this is cash flow from investing. हम simple cash flow statement construct कर रहे हैं. We are just keeping things simple. Okay, all right. Now, let's in cash flow for financing. Okay, you have net debt issues. All right. तो अभी के लिए let's just put zero. Okay? जो भी net जो issue होगा, issuance would be positive and the repayments would be negative. Okay, so net this should be this plus this. So what we need to do is okay, we need to it's abhi complete. So what we need to do is balance sheet. Remember, there's a debt component that we said we'll revisit. Let's go to the balance sheet and it's the time to revisit it. Okay, so this yellow. Okay, so here in 2025, okay, what we need to do is we need to link it with any new debt issuances. Okay, so plus go to cash flow, that is issuances plus any repayments. Okay, repayments would be negative, तो अपने आप sign take care हो जाएगा, and that's it. ये हमने link कर दिया and let's just drag it forward. This is done. All right. Okay, so this is done. All right. In terms of linkage, it's proper. Now, okay, cash. How much cash? Cash is cash flow from operations, cash flow from investing, plus cash flow from financing. This is the net change in cash. Okay. All right. Now, this needs to be, remember, balance sheet may, this was something we said we'll revisit it later. So now it's the time. This is the final thing that we need to do. Okay. So total cash क्या है? The beginning of 2025. It's this last year investments plus cash equivalents plus any bank balance. Okay. उसमें you add at the end of 2025, okay, you would generate this much amount of cash, 1632 million rupees. To add कर दो. Drag it forward. Okay. The moment you're done, your linkage, you have linked all the three financial statements. This is the final step in the linkage. Okay, this is the final step. Yeah. All right. So if you see, my balance sheet is balanced. Assets equals liabilities plus equity. Okay. All right. See, before now, all we need to do is we just need to value the business. Okay. Before that, I'm very curious to look at the ratios. Yeah, how these ratios are panned out. Okay. So I have all the formulas put in place already. Okay. I'm just dragging it. EBITDA is as you know, 13% to 20%. Operating leverage at play. EBIT of course would increase, as you saw, 5.4 to 12%. PAT increasing to 7.6%. Okay. And यहाँ पे ROE increasing to 8.1%. And ROIC, okay, I don't know what happened to ROIC. अच्छा, ठीक है. All right. Invested capital is equity plus net debt. मैंने यहाँ formula, I've already put that formula in place. Okay. Equity plus net debt. I'm just making sure this is the right formula. Yes, I think this is right. This is just all right. Okay. So you see ROIC increasing to 8.2%. See, because it's still not a very good looking ROIC. I'll tell you why. Because see, they have such a huge goodwill amount sitting on their books. Okay. It will take more years for them to basically get to a healthy level of ROIC. Okay. That's what happens when you overpay for an acquisition. Okay. So you are sitting with such a high goodwill. Ki ROIC or invested capital, of course, is quite inflated. Okay. All right. All right. अब ना ये वाले कैपिटल रेशियो भी प्रोजेक्ट कर लेते हैं. सी ग्रॉस फिक्स एसेट टर्नओवर क्या है? was 1.2 last 2 years. Although हम triangulate कर रहे हैं कि see our capex assumption should rhyme with history. If it does rhyme with history, so we should be in a close ballpark to the old ratios, with the old ratios. तो क्या है? You take the sales number from 2025 and divide it by the gross PPE of this year plus, हाँ बस यही ले लो क्योंकि कैपिटल वर्क इन प्रोग्रेस हमने लिया नहीं है. All right. Yeah, so it's the same 1.2. It's the same 1.2. So that means that our capex assumptions are not ridiculous. We just triangulated that fact. And of course, it's not ridiculous because we assume the same capex per screen that they're incurring now. Okay, all right. Now let's close the loop and get to the valuation. Okay, right? Okay. So यहाँ पे valuation में, see free cash flows. यहाँ पे we are doing the free cash flow to the firm method of valuation. Let me write FCFF. So that's the surplus cash that's available for distribution to both equity and debt holders. Okay? After you have made payments, after you've netted out your day-to-day working capital and capex needs, capital expense needs. So that's a surplus cash that's available for distribution to both equity and debt holders. That's really free cash flow to firm. ठीक है? और यहाँ पे ideally when a firm has a lot of debt, you should use free cash flow to the firm. Okay? You can also use FCFE, free cash flow to equity, but let's just go ahead with the free cash flow to the firm. Okay? Abhi, because usually it's said that it's a better method when you have a high capital intensity, when you have a lot of debt on your books. ठीक है? तो हम यहाँ पे वो method use करते हैं. All right? तो उसके लिए what you have to do is first you have to have EBIT. We already have EBIT. You pull in EBIT. The 5 years. ठीक है? And then from EBIT, okay, you have to get to know not net operating profit after tax. ठीक है? तो ये क्या है? ये लो, EBIT लो. मुझे हार्ड कोड करना नहीं चाहिए, लेकिन I'm just doing it in the interest of time. This is net operating profit after tax. This is the starting point of free cash flow to the firm. A detailed video भी मैं बना चुका हूं. All right. Okay. Now you add depreciation. Add depreciation. You add this amount. Depreciation आपने add कर दिया. ठीक है? Change in working capital, जो change in working capital है, okay, वो आपने उठा लिया यहां से, just pick it up. You have a negative working capital, so it gets added back. Okay, positive contributor to your free cash flow. You remove any capex. Remove any capex. Now you can estimate free cash flow to the firm, which is net operating profit after tax. Usme you add back depreciation, you remove the change in working capital, which happens to be positive in this case. Well, negative work in this case, but then it gets added. Negative working capital always, as I said, is a positive contributor to your cash flow. And then you add capex, which is negative. Sorry, मैंने कुछ गड़बड़ किया क्या? Okay, all right. So we've estimated the free cash flow to the firm for the next 5 years. Okay. देख लेते हैं कितना growth है. I'm just curious to see how the free cash flows are growing every year. 46% growth. All right. So can we assume, see, definitely as for the longevity of the cash flows, certainly this is not a 5-year play, right? Okay. Consumption, I think in India is just starting. Okay. And we looked at so many industry metrics. So minimum 10 years, so you need to do projections. Okay. So in fact, a lot of, if you look at the reports by a lot of equity research analysts, they go on to project 15 years. मैं थोड़ा conservative हो रहा हूँ. Okay. Because I do not know how this would play out beyond 10 years. Okay. Because certainly there are risks in this business. Okay? OTT and, OTT risk hai, or the movie content, it's a very supplied, the whole story playing out is dependent upon the kind of quality content that's produced. Any which ways, so मैं फिलहाल के लिए I'm just assuming 10-year window, but you could potentially assume a 15-year window as well, which is fine, but certainly not less than 10 years. Okay? मैं यहाँ assume कर रहा हूँ 33% ये है, 25% हो जाएगा, 20%. This is just an assumption, guys. Terminal rate, I'm assuming 5%, close to inflation. Okay? That's my assumption. मैं ये assumption है. All right. Now, तो free cash flows आपके कितने होंगे? In the future years, वो ये आपके कितने हो जाएंगे? All right. Fifth, last terminal year में, last year में क्या होगा? Okay. In the terminal year, that is year 10 in my case, okay, you have to divide it by, and again, this is a formula, weighted average cost of capital, which is 12. I'm not getting into how I estimated that, which would for another video, otherwise this is going to get very long. WACC minus growth rate which is 5%. ठीक है, all right, so मेरा ये भी हो गया. Now all of this needs to be discounted. Present value ले लेते हैं for all the free cash flows. You take this, you divide it by 1 plus log. So this is done. Okay, so the total enterprise value would be sum of all the cash flows, present value of all the future free cash flows. So this is my enterprise value. Okay, so now to get to the fair equity value or the fair market value of equity, okay, you have to remove the debt component. ठीक है, अब debt component remove करिए. Debt कितना है? And remember, we're not treating lease liabilities as debt in this valuation. So that's why I have this note यहाँ पे. Okay, ये तो यहाँ पे बैलेंस शीट में गए and you these are two debt components. तो ये हो गया. Add cash. Cash कितना है? Go to balance sheet. The cash component कहाँ गया? Cash कहाँ गया यार? हाँ ये investments plus cash equivalents plus bank balance. ये पूरा cash component हो गया. Equity value क्या हो गई मेरी? So it's around 16,159. My equity value is around 60, almost 16,000 CR. Okay, all right. This is almost 1,60,000 in million. So this is around 16,000 CR. ठीक है, तो fair equity value कितनी हो गई मेरी? See, number of shares that they have is 98.4. So this divided by, this is the fair share value, 98.4 million. So the fair share value is 1618, and this is very close to what it is trading right now. This is so basically as per this valuation, okay, as per my valuation, with all the operating leverage playing out, okay, the firm is fairly valued. This business is fairly valued. It was available at a discount, a few weeks back, but now it has caught a pace. ठीक है, तो अभी right now it's fairly valued as per this valuation. अभी एक चीज मैंने नहीं करी है. Any which ways, fair EV by EBITDA है. Fair EV, this is the fair EV by EBITDA. EBITDA कितना है? ले लेते हैं 2024 का. This is 21 is the fair EV by EBITDA. Okay. By the way, one thing I said, एक चीज और करनी चाहिए थी मुझे जो अभी मैंने की नहीं है. I think the video is getting too long. Okay. See, क्या है कि they've also said कि they would be capital light now in the new screen additions. Okay, so basically I think I discussed this. They are asking developers or mall owners to put in some capital so that, and in return they'll share a higher portion of revenue with them. ठीक है, all right. तो अगर वो adjustment करो ना, so the fair value, so what happens is ROIC, okay, increases slightly. Okay, and I've done that in a separate sheet. Okay, right. So ROIC increases slightly. Okay, all right, because of course that is now they'll be a little less capital intensive, and then it has a small positive impact on the valuation. So the valuation would increase slightly. Okay, all right. तो वो adjustment मैंने किया हुआ है. I'll tell you what adjustment I've made actually. So I'll just so see कहाँ पे गया capex. All right. See यहाँ पे ना, I've assumed you incur the same capex per every screen. Okay, what would happen is, okay, for a portion of the new screens, you would incur a slightly lower capex. What they have on to say is, by the end of 5 years, at least 30% of the new screens would be on a capital light model as opposed to the current model. So there'll be a reduction in the capex. Okay, for 30% of the new screens. Okay, so this number should go down, and in return, ये जो number है, sale of movie tickets, this should slightly dip. Okay, but ये impact होगा. Okay. All right. So just a couple of very quick things before we conclude. See, I've been saying all along that there are tremendous operating, this business has a lot of operating leverage. Okay, and also operating deleverage for that matter. Operating leverage and deleverage are two sides of the same coin. Okay, two extremes. Okay. So I want to show you something. So let me go to the bottom up estimates wala sheet. Okay. See, I've assumed that at the end of 5 years, they'll operate at 27% occupancy. which is still lower than the occupancy at which they operated pre-COVID, which was above 30%. Okay. Now let's assume a OTT risk intensifies. The quality of movies coming in is not that great. So a lot of people, they rather watch the movies on OTT platforms instead. Okay. And so let's say the occupancy drops to, let's say, 26%. Okay. From 27 drops to 26%. Yeah. So now if you look at the valuation, the fair value per share has dropped from 1600 something to 1300 something. So it's a very disproportionate adverse impact to the valuation on just 1% drop in occupancy. This is operating deleverage playing out. Okay? Because your fixed costs have stayed the same, but you have lesser number of people coming in. Okay, so the revenue has dropped, but the costs have remained the same. Okay, so there is, of course, a negative impact to the margin. And because there's a negative impact to the margin, your valuation has actually dropped disproportionately. That is what is happening. So that is a real risk in this business because they do not control the content. They do not control, they don't have any supplier power. Because that is something we need to be mindful of. Okay. All right, so let me change the occupancy rate back to what it was. Okay? It was 27%, which I think is reasonable. Any which ways, my larger point was to show you the that how valuation is so sensitive to occupancy rate because this business has high operating leverage. All right. So I'm hoping, guys, you learned something in this video series because this valuation was particularly interesting. The analysis and valuation of this company was interesting because it has A, it has high fixed cost, high operating leverage. B, it has high goodwill because of the merger. And third, it has a lot of lease liabilities as well. All right. So of course, we need to understand as to how do we navigate through all of this and how do we factor all of these three things in our valuation. So that's why the valuation of such a business was particularly very interesting. Okay. All right. So yeah, so if you have any questions, please feel free to write to me and I'm happy to share this sheet, okay, with you. And yeah, so if you are interested in learning financial modeling, equity research, valuation, please feel free to write to me. Okay? And as I said in the beginning of the video, that I am thinking of starting a cohort, if you will. So what I'll do is I'll basically bundle multiple students together in a cohort or in a batch, if you will. And instead of one-to-one mentoring or training, which I have been doing so far, I will mentor them, train them together, which would be a more productive use of my time and hopefully theirs as well. All right. And plus, of course, there would be peer-to-peer learning, which of course cannot be discounted. All right. Okay. The final piece that's remaining is equity research report writing. So I'll make a separate video on that. All right. But hopefully you learned something in this video series. Thank you.